Hi, welcome back everyone. In this video, let's go through the process of installing WordPress locally on our machine. So we've already installed Xampp and we've got our development server up and running. Now we want to download the software and get that up and running in our Xampp environment. So to do that, we're going to head over to wordpress.org and we're going to click on the button that says Get WordPress. So we're going to click on that button. Got a couple little messages, but the file you can see is being downloaded here. And it's a much smaller file than Xampp. It's only 13 megabytes. So once that's downloaded, you can see it's come down here as a zip file. I'm going to click on that and show that in the folder. Here's our WordPress application. Now what we need to do is extract this zip file first. So the first thing we're going to do is right click on that file and say extract all. Click extract. And you can see here there's over 2,000 items, so it might take a few minutes or so just to unpack. Okay, so that's nearly finished. And Windows has opened up the folder for me. So I'm still in my downloads folder. I can see here's the original zip file. I can get rid of that now, so I'll delete that. And I'm left with my WordPress folder. Now if I double click on that folder, you'll see in there is another folder called WordPress. And if I double click on that folder, you can see there's a bunch of files in there. This is the WordPress software, and it's made up of HTML, CSS, JavaScript and PHP pages. And what we want to do is move this folder onto our web server. So what I'm going to do is go back to this folder, and it's this folder I want to drag into my web server. So I'll move this folder over to the right hand side, and I'm going to navigate to my C drive, which is where Xampp is installed. So C drive, Xampp. And again, this should look pretty familiar from the last video, the last exercise. And where we need to put the file is in this folder here called htdocs. So I'll double click on this folder. And I'm going to drag my WordPress folder into there. Okay, so we've transferred that over to our web server. The next thing we need to do is just fire up our web server and navigate to this web address. So let's check our control panel. It's still running. We'll click on admin and we're going to go to localhost /WordPress. And now we move into the WordPress setup. So when you're working with WordPress.com, you didn't have to do any of that. It was already installed on the server. You just said, here's my username, here's my email address, here's my password, create my site for me. Now what we're doing is going through a detailed configuration, and we're essentially doing the same thing, but everything is now on your computer as opposed to in the cloud. So let me go through a quick example. I'm going to accept some of the defaults for this one. So we're going to click continue. Now at this point it's saying, okay, I need to work with a database because all of the content is stored in a database. So tell me where the database exists, tell me how I can access it, and the host and so on. So we need to give WordPress a bit more information about our setup. So we'll click Let's Go. What's the name of the database? Now this is where we're going to have to flip back to our Xampp control panel and go and create our new database. And it's relatively straightforward. So let's go back to our control panel. MySQL is our database engine. And we're going to click on Admin. Now this moves us into a piece of software called phpMyAdmin, which is geared up for managing MariaDB and MySQL databases. Now we'll look at this later in the module in Strand C, but for now, all we need to do is create a new database. And it's pretty straightforward. So over on the left-hand side, you're going to click New. Give it a name. So in this case, I'm just going to call this WordPress. So type in the name, click Create. We've now created an empty database called WordPress, and you can see here it's on the left hand side. So at this point we can just ignore MySQL, we can close that down and we'll go back to our setup. So the database is called WordPress, we've created that. The username and password to connect to the database server in this case is root, and the password is nothing, it's empty. Now again, you wouldn't put this into a production environment, that wouldn't be a sensible idea, but we're working locally on our machine and it's for development purposes. The database host is running on localhost in the same way that Apache is also running on our local machine. So we've got WordPress, root, empty password, localhost, and we're going to click submit. It's saying, are you ready? So we're going to hit run installation. And now it's asking us what's the name of the website that we're creating. So this should look pretty familiar to what we did when we used WordPress.com. So let's continue with our pizza website. A username. So again, I'll use the word test. And it's suggesting a strong password. It's actually created this for you. Now I recommend just while you're developing locally on your machine, you keep this information in a separate file. It's going to make it easier for you to remember. I'm going to set this to test, which, as is being suggested by the installer, is very weak, but it's easier for me to type. I'll confirm that weak password. You should use your university email address. And then we're going to tick discourage search engines. But again, we're not serving this on the web, so that's not as important for the time being. When we're ready, click Install WordPress. And that's been created. So now to log in. Test. My password. Log in. And I'm now at the admin dashboard. And that is quite familiar. That's the same as WordPress.com. So you can go ahead and create your website locally. So there you go. That's how we install WordPress using the WordPress files from wordpress.org into a Xampp installation.